to this webinar from the Open Group, which today is being presented by Orbis Software, an active member of the Open Group. Before I hand over to our presenter, Lou Labouchin, I'd just like to cover off a few housekeeping issues just to maintain the quality of this event. We would encourage everyone to ask questions during this webinar. This is one of the objectives of presenting these events. The way to submit a question is to use the QA text facility in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. If you do use that facility, please could I ask you to address your questions to all. That way everyone gets to see the questions that are being submitted. You may also be interested to know that this event is being recorded. So if you have to leave the event early or you have any local technical difficulties, you will have an opportunity to revisit this event both in video and audio from tomorrow. So, Lou, if you're ready, please can I hand over to you to start the presentation?
Thank you, Simon. Welcome to everybody to today's event. My name is Lou Labouchin, and I want to about repositories. I know it's a topic that is hotly questioned these days in a lot of organizations trying to figure out what repository to do for. And I thought it would be great the 10 factors that I found as what I'm using myself to decide what repository I'll be in my environment. I did a statement as I start off this presentation. I want to say this is non-scientific. So if anybody was looking for a specific, well thought out process of going through it, this is not it. There's no models in here. There's nothing about the accurate way of selecting repository. This is really based around some experience that I've had over the past few years on repositories, working with them, as well as some people I spoke to about how they go about selecting a repository. And I think if you look at the market at the moment, everyone is now renaming their products an architecture repository. So what I found is I did a little search to find out what an enterprise architecture repository is. So one of the interesting things I came out with is that there's technology tools that are calling themselves architecture tools. I used to work years ago as a data warehouse architect, and the data warehousing modeling tools I used those days are now called architecture modeling tools. And the same with UML modeling. So if you're full of UML tools that's been branded as architecture modeling tools as well. So there's a lot of these out there. Nothing at the moment that I can say that I found very a good way of selecting a tool. The staff for actually selecting a tool. But I can say that the Open Group has got an active work group working on tackling the issue. So our formula is going to be, or don't know if everybody's members of the Open Group, but all I can say is watch this space. I think there's some things coming out that will be more scientific than I'm talking about. But yeah, let's start. So what I've learned in my life was if I talk about a repository, I mean a real repository. I started off in architecture. I think most of us start off in architecture doing some drawings. It used to be paper. We went over to a tool called Visio, which can go from a love affair to a love-hate relationship very quickly if you treat it as modeling a capping tool, basically. So I've been working on some repositories and environments. The biggest concern that I've got that I'm actually listing on whenever I look at a tool, evaluating a tool, is that I need a proper repository at the back of that modeling front end I see. So it's great to have a very visual interface to the models, but if I can't share those models with anybody else in the team, or I can't reuse a model on a different project, then it's no use to me. It's too time consuming to actually work for that environment. Then the second thing I found as well is that if I don't have a proper repository where I can have shared models, it's impossible for me to extract extract the right information to build views. And according to me, having the ability to create views out of your architecture environment is the cornerstone of doing architecture. So, number one, the first point there is, and I'm going to explain later as we go through this, is I don't just want to use diagrams. I want a proper repository behind it, and proper repository, in my experience, means I must be able to get to it with SQL. So one of those guys, because I'm coming from a data background, I feel very comfortable to extract data using an SQL environment, and I can understand relationships from there. So if with very fancy modern tools were XML based repositories, but I'm the old school kind of guy that I am. I've got difficulty extracting data out of it, so it's not really something for me. So it's not what I would call a repository. Then the second point that I think is important is the model. Without going into all the details, it's kind of the vendor model is the way that meta model components allow you to save different model types into an environment. For example, if I look at the repository tools very much around the UML modeling environment, and brilliant tools out there that assist you as long as you're using the UML language. Not trying to model using another standard, for example, deepening, or new wonderful Archimate that the Open Group is also printing. And for those environments, the repository is very difficult to into the meta model. And even if you want to just add some attributes, sometimes you want to capture more information about a system or a process, some custom attributes you want to add, and it's a lot of effort you have to put into doing it. So evaluating at the moment repositories. The second thing that I've said often having a proper repository is that getting into that repository and being able to add attributes, add new meta model objects must be simple. You're not actually in this architecture environment to build modeling tools. You're there to actually engage the stakeholders, to engage business, to capture the right information. So if you want me to have a degree in physics or to extend my meta model, then I'm not interested. And so having a nice interface and an understandable way of changing the meta model is actually important. That is into the third component, talking about simple, not having an advanced degree, it's the user interface. Now, as I said, I started my career with a picture using paper and Visio as a way of capturing information. That didn't work for me. So I must say that Visio is probably the most used architecture out there still. But Visio on its own, it's really wasting time and effort if I can't reuse some information. So yes, so there's two parts to this number 3 here, an intuitive interface. I like the view interface. I like the way that I can easily move things around, get objects going. I can help myself with adding on a 5-day training course to get information captured. So I like the layout of Visio. The Visio on its own doesn't work for me. So that's saying as I've looked at the different tools, and I can see that one of the key features of modern architecture tools, or the field actually out there, is that they actually import visual and diagrams. And I think that's important for me. So first of all, Visio as a front end, and I think that's where the iServer component comes in here. So iServer as a repository works for me because I can work in Visio, but I'm not limited I'm not locked into Visio. The information is freed and goes into the repository, so that's what I like. Secondly, if I can't use something like iServer, there's other tools. I think Gatewatch is one of them. If I start mentioning tool names now, I must just go on through a long list. So I'll stop doing that. But anyway, there's some great other repositories out there or tools that can import visual diagrams. That's a way that it works. If you have some non-technical users grab visual diagrams and you want to import them into your repository for take that forward. And thirdly, even if you're not associated with Visual at all, if you're running on a platform that doesn't support Microsoft products or that your company is anti-Microsoft, that's fine, as long as your interface is just easy to use and easy to understand. And from that perspective, I think what I've found is that I've worked with people in organizations that is used to working with Office. It took a long time to adopt, now to actually write their own letters. I'm not expecting them to, as senior people with a lot of knowledge, but they're not very modeling. They didn't go in an area where modeling, the use of modeling tools were commonplace. And now you expect them to start capturing knowledge or do the architecture work within a repository environment. If your repository is not very friendly, very intuitive, then they don't actually use the tool. They will go back to paper or they will do it in Visio. And with that, you'll have a junior person on the team that will recapture that Visio document into the modeling environment, duplicating an effort. So again, I don't really want to go through a 5-day or 10-day training course just to little. So if it's an intuitive interface, then it works for me. I say visual-like because I think that's something people can relate to. But I want to say is that if I start using an environment without going on a long training course, that's what I'm actually looking for. Something that's more intuitive. Leads me to number 4 is TOGAF support. Again, my bias is coming out here again. TOGAF as an architecture methodology is something that I'm passionate about. I think that it's been moved, or that's what a lot of architecture initiatives that we have around the world around the common comments. I think that the TOGAF and the open group as a whole has put together a lot of different people with different backgrounds, and they've formed a community that can start talking to each other. Because we speak the same language, which is the TOGAF language. Now, using TOGAF development method allows me to have a structured approach towards creating content and adding my business. Using the content from TOGAF then allows me to have consistency when I save these models. So I have TOGAF support from the tool allows me to have a much more standardized approach, and it assists organizations with having common practices and common standards in place. And thinking about those, although it's not perfect, I think it's something that we can all complain about the things and we can make it better. But like about it at the moment is the consistency of the framework allows us to a way of communicating, and it allows us to have modeling tools that at certain standard viewpoints that we can follow and create views that work for our environment, which is more consistent. And I could say the same thing that if you don't like TOGAF, and something like out-of-the-box support for MODAF or DOGAF is something that I see it's growing in the world, in the military environment, and it seems to me it's been key into the military environment as well. But I've really been on a project where the organization were looking at studying at practice, and they used the MODAF as the baseline methodology. And again, with MODAF standard viewpoints defined, communication was easier in the organization. So if you have your architecture tool, the moment the architecture tool starts supporting these kind of frameworks, more consistency, which is great for the organization and great for the architect, because you spend less time trying to fix these things and trying to complain about what should we use for a box, or how should the layout be as we standardize it. Then I think we've all struggled with, if you've been in an organization and you start out with an environment. I worked in an environment where I was capturing information around the application portfolio and the processes of this organization. And if you start off with a modeling tool, a modeling tool allows you to only use the front end to capture the data. After doing this little process, it looks the same. Your little mouse hand gets started in cramps. It takes a lot of time, and I sometimes don't know if that time spent in building it is really the value you're going to get out of it worthwhile. The total value you get out of it is difficult. So going back to point number one, I said in the first point is you have to have a real repository, something that you can actually access. And in my terms, that means is I've got a SQL database or Oracle or something with relational database in the back end. If I've got a database in the back end, I know that I've got a mechanism available where I can start using a different interface to load objects into this database. So make it easy, I would say that in a tool, your tool doesn't matter what tool you're looking at, it must support bulking of data. Because to do this, if there's a long of things, processes, applications, technology, anything that you want to load with this lot of volume, simple objects. You can't afford to load everything using a front-end modeling environment. You have to get the data out by loading it, especially the environments where we've got automated tools that can sniff your network for software. So if you want to start looking at input objects, start classifying, relating them, start to identify grouping it all together, trying to identify common object, common component, then using a deployed facility is right way of time and allowing you to get more active in this environment. So I've thought things through, and I think the best way of also getting information from users as sometimes giving them Excel. Another thing that I've been doing for a while is I've been going through the process of engaging users, and instead of giving them or sitting with a meeting with them, taking them to modeling environment to capture processes, we use Excel and even the user sits in and he fills in an Excel spreadsheet with information that we recapture and we pull that into a repository. From there we generate the objects that we put onto a view. We overview a bit and boxical. There we go. And we've got a wonderful output and at a fraction of the time to take to capture things by hand. That was of data and then visualization. What I found is architects, especially technology architects, tend to build architecture modules or models for themselves, and not for the stakeholder, the end user, or the senior manager, or the financial manager. Obviously, you need to take a decision on the information. And again, it might be my background in the business intelligence that I've been into users and trying to see, but how do we present information to a user and expect from this user? Do we expect this user to take a decision? Are we expecting this user to give advice? Or are we expecting this user to take the information I'm giving him and create something from it? So it can be a manager, or it can be a budget officer, or it can be a government officer, it can be a developer, it can be a solutions architect. Depending on who the person is, there's information that they need to make decisions with. And present information in a way that makes sense to them, that they can with looking at it, it must be usable. And unfortunately, a lot of the repositories and modeling tools that I've been exposed to is linking your visualization with the modeling notation. So there's no separation of separating your visual content or your visualization of your object from actual meaning of the model at the back end. So, for example, still use a use case diagram, but if you're using stickmen, you can use a deep animated character on the front. And if your main tool will allow you to change the stick for review purpose without changing the meaning at bounded value, that's what that's actually looking for to give value for your stakeholder, because architecture will only be only useful for the organization, or can be considered an asset for the organization if it's used by the stakeholders. And visualization is one of those key things. And then going from visualization one step further is then, in my repository, what I want to do is I want to be able to not just visualize diagrams or active diagrams. I want to be able to dynamically interact with the repository. It's maybe not something that architects or a traditional architect being exposed to or use a lot of the time. But what I found is that in my case, when I look at organizations, we go from an architecture design phase into the implementation phase. A lot of questions are started being asked about why decisions were taken, what is the implication of changing something, what is the relationship, because now we go from a high level architectural view to implementation views, which are much more detailed, many more teams involved in building, putting the solutions in place. And the view is different, but we don't always see the forest from the trees. And having a visualization available, or what we can have data analysis in our architecture tool, allows us to mine the architecture repository the same way we do with operational data in an organization. So it's a different type of information, but it's also information that we can use to gather information and gather intelligence out of. That makes a lot of sense, I think, for organizations. So, I'm looking at it now and I see that it's now catching on. Not a lot of tools have data analysis components built into it. There's a few of the new generation tools. I can see that very focused on not just building analysis or 2D model, but also looking at how do I engage my operational teams, my implementation teams, making sure that I get the information, that they get the right information to enable them to make decisions even in production. The thing to point that I'm always looking for is very, very important one, and this is the integrity of your repository. One thing I just must mention is that architecture is not like an ERP system. Although I've tried to relate the content for you now from data perspective, and say that we can manage data and keep information into my repository in the same way as with ERP or operational systems. But unlike an operational system, when more people update information into my architecture repository, I kind of have a problem with consistency, because it's not a scenario that because if I input information into my repository, it's not that because I first person put information in there that anyone else cannot change that. It might be a scenario where I've looked at a model, I'm updating a model in the finance division, trying to put a new procurement process together. Aside, there's a team looking at my supply chain. They're also busy with a different project organization, but they are processes related to my supply chain process or my process, but not really. So in that case, on more than one update to the repository, and it does happen that it goes out of sync, and there's inconsistencies. There's orphans in the repository as people update information. And it's important for your architecture tool to have technical integrity checks. And it sounds really fancy, but it's basically just the script that you have to run in your repository to make sure that the relationships are valid. That's there. What a lot of these tools are doing is although they're using relational databases, they're moving the integrity checks from the database because they must allow updates to the models that break this consistency. They must depend, and they move the checking to the front end or the visualization side of the tool. And to do as an architect or a repository administrator is you must script through the repository to make sure everything's integrity is there. But then another component there is logical quality that we have to look at, and that's something that because architecture is a activity performed by humans interpreting the environment using their knowledge and experience. There's some logical errors that creeps in there that you do not pick up with a technical check of the database. So technically, the information is linked. Logically, it doesn't make any sense. So this quality assurance process is a human factor that must be by somebody, and it's very, very important to have both the technical, logical quality assurance done within your practice or within the tool to ensure that you have information that is consistent and that is believable by the stakeholders. If you have a consistent, believable set of information, then the whole effort was for nothing, because people will not trust your data over a period of time if it becomes inconsistent or the answers they get is not what they expect. Point number is always check if they either. Point number one, the best option will be: do they understand that have to actually check for quality and technical and a logical level? And secondly, is have a capability or to have a mechanism that will administrate of the repository do these kind of things quickly and easily, and to be able to flag any errors that's in there for updates. Point number 9, and something that I'm also laughing now because it's such a small environment. Architecture repositories is really, if an organization, it's a second on an environment. Even large architecture repository doesn't come close to anything that the operational databases or the operational environment will deal with. So what you have is you have an operational team that look after the systems involved organization, specialized people, they understand the systems very well. And if you now come with a repository that's to run on that operational environment, and you're expecting the ops teams to support your repository, but you are selecting technology that they're not comfortable with, then you're opening yourself up for a lot of frustration and a lot of mansaying in the organization. So my advice here is that a key consideration for selecting the repository has got nothing to do with the quality of the repository at all, but it's got to do with the supportability of this platform. So you might have two excellent repositories next to each other. Let's say they're equal in all things. Then I have to make a choice between which technology that I implement in my organization. I would select the technology where I know that our operational team has got experience in it. Again, in front of you, I've just used Microsoft as an example. I think it's Microsoft Java or the different databases that's out there that runs on MySQL, for example. The idea is a flavor day with these new kind of platforms. So if whatever technology you deploy in the organization, it must be supported. Or the repository that you use, I would suggest or strongly suggest that you use technology that you are comfortable with. Otherwise, what you'll end up with is you as the architecture practitioner will have to deal with the vendor. You will have to get the skills to update the repositories. But simple things like backups. Who's going to back up your repository? If there's a problem with the user on the desktop, you're deploying a repository across your organization, there's some front-end components to it, the front-end gets deployed, there's a problem with the front-end, your support desk doesn't have the core skills for that. What will do, they'll come through to you, and it's just an extra expense. So if you're a large organization with a large architecture team, no problem. I'm sure you have at least one or two different database administrators or systems administrators dedicated to your environment that you've got trained up to understand the technologies. But for smaller or less organized environments, I say that there's a bit of a problem if you have to then speak to yourself and do support, do the backup, talk to the stakeholders, modeling, do the marketing, end up spending a lot of time managing an architecture environment instead of doing the architecture work for the business, which will end up with having an inconsistent and a very short-lived architecture career in that organization. Then, point before we get to all the questions, is that you have a proper vendor support. So, as an architecture practitioner, I've been told. The thing that is, I started off with the visual stuff, and I moved on to UML tools, and I started to say, but I don't have an engine. So what do? No problem. I'll go to the web, I'll download the community edition of the Uling tool, I implement, I'm competent, I can run it, I'm around making coffee for everybody, supporting the repository, everything goes well while I'm in the project. I'm on the project for a year. People are happy that we've got an excellent tool, great support. Then as life goes on, I'm getting bored with this environment, this project, so I move on to the next project. What happens now? Is there infrastructure around there? Either way, if something happens to that environment with the port, what happens is that because I haven't looked at and vulnerability as a starting point, you end up with an environment where that repository not support or it's not sustainable over the long run. So I've been involved in environments where we had good leaders coming to organizations who want to sell their software, but no local references. I'm sitting in South Africa at the moment. We're in the US, so our market is much smaller for architecture environments. So what we need in our environment is we need to understand that whatever tool and vendor comes into our environment, you must be able to support the tool is selling into this environment. And if there's no local references in wherever you're located at the moment, then wary of that tool, because you need some consistency, getting some local support out. Then some contracts. First of all, pay for your software. After buy something, don't get a community edition, get a subcontract. If something goes wrong, if there's updates, you must be able to phone somebody. Always when you least expect it, when things go wrong. So this is as you are exporting that set of data to present to the board with your findings. Something goes awry in the repository and you can't get the data out. That's when you're able to pick up the phone and call for support. Then but also what I've done before is I did point out that I love doing things myself. So previously I did a DIY repository. I used Vero, I used SQL Server, I created all these wonderful things linking everything together. But as much as I was on the project, things went well. But the moment you're off, it's so much custom stuff into it. It's not a long-term sustainable environment. So my experience, keep a vendor involved. Look for roadmap where these tools are going, and look for support contracts. There's some large tools out there that's been bought over by big companies, and you're not sure what's going to happen next. Not sure about the roadmap, not sure about where these are going, what's their thinking around architecture. Are they staying in the architecture market, or are going into a server market, or are they doing more PPM than architecture? So that's one of those areas that I think is a lot on my list that I found very important. So, again, as I said, for those of you, I think that for the 99% of you out there who's not using Architecture repository, but we're using Visio. There's starter packs available from August, and this presentation is a bit more around it. It's also available as a white paper on the download site. The Visio starter pack is great to look at how the mutation goes, but as point number one I pointed out, get everything into a repository. Otherwise, what's the use? So Simon, I see there's a few questions coming through. I don't know if you want to go through it, and then we can start answering those.
Yeah, that's great, Lou. Many thanks there. So really good, insightful points there made during your presentation, which I thank you for very much. Yes, if anyone has any questions now, please do write them in the QA facility at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and we will work our way through those questions. Yeah, Lou, we have a couple of questions and statements made that I think may be worth our opinions back on. The first one is an observation from Florian Letterbacher, and I'll read it to you. That each tool must have an intuitive user interface, but we suggest that it shall visually look like Visio. In my opinion, this offers too many possibilities for drawing something where enterprise architecture should be more concerned with the content that's shown rather than different kinds of lines, boxes, etc. What's your feel for that, Lou?
I agree. So the only reason I'm talking with Visio is because the adoption of Visio. Personally, I found a lot of people outside of technology that I've been working with, and it seems to me I'm also moving on in life, so I can't say the old people, but there's people in organizations that I think is brilliant, that's got years of experience, but they're afraid of tools. And what I found is when I talk to these guys, they seem to be not intimidated by Visio. It might be just the fact that it's a Microsoft product. It might just that I'm talking about if you open a PowerPoint and showing models in PowerPoint, it might look like that. But I'm saying Visio because I think it's something that a lot of guys are using. I think I found that even people that's non-technical isn't afraid to use something like Visio. But all I'm saying is that yes, let's go and get an environment where we have architecture. That's the look and feel of the architecture is around something that's actually intuitive. And again, so the only reason I said Visio is because a lot of guys are using Visio that's afraid of adopting an architecture tool. But as long as it's non-threatening, let's put it that way. So maybe it's a bit strongly worded to say Visio, but if it's anything that's non-technical, not threatening, with a simple environment. And I agree that sometimes Visio has got all these options for you, but hiding those options is easy by allowing or taking out some of the Visio templates. So again, it's just something that I found most people are referred to. That's why I said it must sort of have a Visio look and feel. But I can restate this and say, make it simple, make it threatening. And that's what you have to understand. Understand your architects, not just your stakeholders, but your architects as well, because you don't want to recapture information twice into environments. Okay,
that's great. Thank you for that clarification. I have a question from Patricia Kallenbag, and she's asking, she's wondering I don't understand why TOGAF 9 is required and not recommended. And I think she's referred to this reference on point number 4.
Point number 4 there. A personal base. That's it. So again, it's recommended for anyone else, but in my personal, if I go on a project, that's what I'm for. So as I said, this is really I didn't do this as an objective approach of doing things. This is what I found that made my life easier on the project. For myself, from my perspective is, if I'm using TOGAF as a default methodology and customizing it from there, I have an architecture repository supporting that. It makes my life easier. So it's really a personal preference. It might be that in your environment you don't like TOGAF, you don't see it, you don't use it. You might want to have a different approach. it might be that you say, but I'd rather have a Zachman approach, because my way of doing architecture is I use Zachman as the ontology of choice, and that's how I start capturing information. And there's a tool out there that's that is supporting the Zachman approach. But what I want to say about that is that, again, it's a personal opinion.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. We've got a question here for a little bit more clarification on slide number 2 from Sribaraj. He's just asking the bottom point, whether you could just go back and go over the bottom point on slide number 2, please.
Slide number 2. What is the question is at the bottom point?
If we go right to the bottom,
Just or when is used as input?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Oh yes, I just put that at the tongue in cheek to say that this is a personal opinion. This is not a scientific one. This is out of our side. When I speak to people, this is the top 10 things that I think when looking at TOGAF 9 and running projects. This is what I look for as a practitioner. I didn't do a scientific quadrant analysis, or I do a quadrant in there because it's a certain vendor that is using that methodology for placing tools into different quadrants. And I've looked at it, and I've reflected the tools, and I see a lot of tools in the same quadrant, and it's not competing with each other. It's not meaning something to me. So by purely looking at the leader for an architecture tool didn't actually solve my problem. So I had to have a different way of looking at how do I my repository that makes sense for me. So that's the point there. Just trying to say I'm not trying to be difficult about this. It's a opinion, and out of experience that I found is working for me.
Okay, I hope that helps, Surab. Question from Gangadhar Venota, and asking, are there any open source tools that support a repository, even if they're in their infancy, Lou? Do you know any?
Yes. There's 2 projects out there of note. One is called the Essentials Project, a source repository. It is it's called the Essentials Project, yes. And uses an environment that I think is more towards ontology kind of environment that I don't believe is sustainable. Personally, I like open source tools. I think it's right to use it. Another tool out there, if you send me a mark, I'll send them a list of things that I know about the tools that's out there that you can use. Open source tools that are supporting these things. But I tried them all, and I'm uncomfortable with it. And it's on this last point. So the portability. You can actually do your own things as well. Taking it and making it to a single database is not that difficult, but it's not supportable. It's not a lot of understand effort goes into these kind of things, and it's great to play with. I think open source one, there's even human tools that's open source, or not open source, but at least a community edition or free edition that you can use. If I can send a list if you can, I'll send them a list of those stuff that I've looked at. But it's great to play with, but I won't trust my data in an operational environment.
Thank you. We've got a follow-up question for Patrice, and she's questioning the relationship between TOGAF 9 repository and other TOGAF 9 components. She's asking, what's the critical nature between the relationship?
Okay, I can just see that to understand the question.
I'll read to you, and she is asking, are interactions of TOGAF 9 repository or TOGAF 9 components critical?
Yes. And okay, that's a yes and a no. So I want to assist it. A proper environment, yes, but don't have to. You can implement TOGAF as a methodology without using a repository. Not recommended, not sustainable in the long term, but do it. I would say that you can use TOGAF as an architecture development method with using TOGAF, the TOGAF framework within the repository. For example, before TOGAF 9 was there, I used to use the Zachman framework as a way of classifying my repository and understanding how do I put my views together. I use the TOGAF architecture development method as a way to structure my processes in an organization. So it's not it's unwritten. But I strongly suggest is you actually do use it together because the value you get out of it is so much more. Because the open group put a lot of effort in understanding and trying to link your repository, your content framework with your method. Allows you that sort of sustainability and getting people up to speed quicker. So it's a preference, I think, more than a requirement.
A question here from Steve Moitoso. He's asking, is there an inherent problem with the tool being ontology-based?
No, it's not a problem with it. It's difficult. That's easy. So the other tool that I've referred to is the Essential Project, the Protege engine, which is Protege engine. I think it's consistent. It's great. It's to understand to have a good way of having consistently define your elements of your meta model. But while I say that's great and everything, I just found it come in an operational environment. Sometimes you just want to you want to cut some corners. You want to get information out. You don't have all the information you need. So in based, really you have to think things through. Structured environment, great, but practical, going on and doing the project, getting the results out for the business in a short time, sometimes it's going to hinder you. So don't say I don't want to say it's a good thing. It's just, but I'm just pragmatic about these kind of things. What works soon can actually get things off the ground, and it's an ontology tool, really an architecture tool. I think that's where the question came in. So if you look at the project, the guy adapted it for this. Use it, but I don't think it's TOGAF particular perspective. It's not as flexible as the speed of the day for you to get the project out as you need to do it.
Great, thank you, Lou. Well, that seems to have come to the end of the questions we have at the moment. So I think at this point I'll probably draw an end to the event. I'd like to thank you for that presentation, and thank you on behalf of Orbis Software working with the Open Group to bring this event to you. Please look out for future events, and I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's event. So on that note, Lou, thank you very much, and I'll end the event. Thank you very much.